Good afternoon. My name is Angela Vincent. I'm a Municipal Stormwater Permit Planner with Department of Ecology. I'll be moderating this session. If you're here for the Municipal Construction Stormwater Site Inspection Toolkit session, you're in the right place. Our presenters today are Rebecca Dugopolski with Herrera and Amy Georgeson with City of Tumwater. Rebecca is an associate engineer with Herrera Consultants with over 13 years of experience in stormwater monitoring, design, and NPDES permit compliance. She has a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from the University of Washington. Amy is a water resources specialist with the City of Tumwater. She has over 17 years of experience in water resources management. She has a bachelor's degree from the Evergreen State College with an emphasis on watershed ecology, hydrology, and Central American studies. She currently coordinates and implements the Phase 2 NPDES permit for the City of Tumwater. And just a few housekeeping items that everyone's probably heard a few times today. Today's presentation will be recorded, but the Q&A session will not. And if you could please silence or turn off your cell phone. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Georgeson. I work with the City of Tumwater, as you just heard. Thanks for making it to the last session today. It is a little bit lighter than it's been the rest of the day, I feel like, but I still feel you here, so thanks for making it. So today we're just going to kind of go over a little bit of the process of how we got to these checklists. How many of you guys have checklists for your construction inspections right now? All right, so not very many of you. You're in the right place then. So basically today we're going to talk a little bit about the permit requirements. We're going to do an overview of the project. Rebecca will talk a little bit about survey results, and then the checklist overview, training overview, and some resources. So basically the permit requirements, so this is both for Phase 1 and Phase 2, municipal stormwater permits. So there's 3 that are called out in the permit. There's the pre-construction inspection to be conducted prior to clearing and construction with the high potential for sediment transport. That's based on that Appendix 7, I believe. And also keep in mind that as an alternative, you can just inspect all sites before construction. So in Tumwater, that's what we're not fully implementing it yet, but that's what we've elected to do. We think that really making sure that those temporary sediment and erosion controls are installed appropriately at the beginning of construction is important to make sure that they're managed throughout the entire construction process. And then during construction inspections to verify that proper installation and maintenance. And it's supposed to be on all sites during construction, but there's no specification of how often you're going out and necessarily doing those inspections. So as a local jurisdiction, you're supposed to set up what your program looks like and how often you want to do those inspections. And then the post-construction inspection, which you're supposed to inspect all permitted development sites upon completion of construction prior to final occupancy. We seem to struggle with that one quite a bit. Final approval or occupancy. And then you're looking at the permanent facilities. But you're also making sure that the temporary erosion sediment controls that are appropriate to be removed at that point in time have been removed and that the site is finally stabilized. And then compliance is 80% of what your jurisdiction has set up for how many of these inspections they want. So in Tumwater, what we've done is we're doing a monthly inspection frequency. We do additional inspections if we need to do follow-up for enforcement or something like that. And we're kind of working on redeveloping a lot of our processes right now to better document some of this stuff. And so part of what we're hoping to get to is looking more at like doing after storm and around the weekend inspections. Right now, we're not really focusing on that. We're just trying to kind of hit that minimum bar, but we'd like to move into doing kind of a more critical time period when we're doing the inspections. So a little bit of the project overview. We got a grant of regional statewide significant, a gross grant. Whoever came up with that acronym is one of my favorite people. I think that's hilariously awesome. So our original proposal was to develop just 3 checklists, pre-construction, during construction, post-construction. And kind of the reason we were doing this, because there's a lot of construction inspection checklists out there already, right? But a lot of the reason why we were looking at doing this is because of the new LID requirements. And not a lot of those were being included in the construction checklist that we had. And we were also seeing that those facilities, the permanent facilities, are not being constructed to the standards, and then they're not functioning as they were designed to. We met, Tumwater and Herrera met, I think, initially, and then we had 2 working group meetings with the Thurston County Storm TAC, which consists of the cities of Olympia, Lacey, Thurston County, and Tumwater. Herrera worked, they also did a survey before all of this, which I think will be on the next slide too. And then they came up with 2 fact sheets, one for Western Washington, one for Eastern Washington, and they did 6 trainings, which were all in Western Washington. So here's kind of the project overview. We started this off a little over a year ago, back in February. In March, a survey was sent out to, I think, most of the jurisdictions, at least the permit coordinators. And then Herrera kind of compiled that information to kind of look at what people were doing out there existing, and Rebecca will get a little bit more into the details of that. Some interesting stuff out there. To me, one of the biggest take-home messages is that a lot of people are still doing paper forms, but a lot of organizations want to move to electronic. And we might be able to touch a little bit more on that today, too. So then, in May last year, we met with the Thurston County Storm TAC. We had that first meeting, and during that meeting, we actually decided, so we had initially proposed these 3 checklists, and what we decided is there was really a need for 5 checklists, and there's twofold reason to this. One is we want to minimize the amount of information on each one of these checklists, right? They're still lengthy, they're still longer than probably most of us would like them to be, but that one of our goals was to try to get concise information. And what we realized when we started talking about them is there's really 2 things that we're looking at here. One is the temporary sediment erosion control, and then the other is the permanent facility during construction and at final. So our 3 checklists became 5 checklists, but now it's going to be less questions within each checklist instead of having a longer list that might not be appropriate for every site. So Herrera took that information, they made a bunch of changes, we got back together in July, we provided some more feedback, and then final checklist came out in October. Those are available up on the Washington Stormwater Center website. Then Herrera developed some draft fact sheets and training materials in September, and we were able to finalize those in October. And then they held 6 trainings between November and March, and they were everywhere from Vancouver up to Bellingham? Snohomish. Edmonds, okay, somewhere up north. There was a couple around where we're at. Those were the ones I was focused on. And then they just did the draft summary report and are finalizing things. So with that, I will give it to Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around for the last talk. So I want to go through a little bit of the survey results. So Amy mentioned that we did a survey as part of this project, and we reached out to a bunch of the permit coordinating groups. We ended up with 45 responses to that, so it was a pretty good response rate. 40 of those were from Phase 2 permittees, 3 were from Phase 1s, and 2 did not specify, but we covered responses from 13 different counties in Washington, so both Western and Eastern Washington. From that, we got a pretty diverse audience, kind of split between inspectors, construction site stormwater inspectors, MPDS permit coordinators, people that manage or oversee inspectors, and then in the other response, those were generally people that served in more than one of those roles. So smaller jurisdictions, you may be wearing more than one of those hats, and just one building inspector out of that group. So. Looking at inspection forms and checklists that are currently used to document construction stormwater site inspections. So only about 11% of the respondents used Ecology's construction stormwater site inspection form, and we thought that was kind of interesting. I thought that was maybe more widely used. About half used a jurisdiction-specific construction stormwater site inspection form. And then the other responses included proprietary software, personally developed forms and checklists, handwritten notes, and information received from submittals such as, site erosion control plan, drainage control plan, things like that. One of the questions we also had on there was, how do you currently track your construction site stormwater observations? So here, this is a pretty interesting distribution. So 29% we're still using a hard copy form checklist, 27% electronic, so fairly good split there, 22% relying on field notes, and then the other responses included, again, proprietary software, associated with inspection tracking and permit systems or databases. And a lot of jurisdictions have also a dual approach, so they have electronic filing of hard copy reports and then possibly separate forms that they would then use for stop work orders and corrective actions, things like that. The goal for tracking construction site stormwater observations in the future, and Amy mentioned this, so a large percentage, 73%, wanted to switch towards using electronic forms in the future. One person wants to stick with their hard copy forms there in the 2% category. 7% prefer field notes, and then the other responses, they're 18%. So I don't think I have the other responses there for that one. But yeah, strongly towards electronic in the future. We also asked about how many questions or fields are included in the current inspection form or checklist or app that's currently being used. We were trying to use this to kind of gauge the complexity of the checklist that we were developing and how many fields people were kind of willing to fill out. So basically the strong preference here was the 10 to 50 fields. So something that seems manageable to fill out on an inspection by inspection basis. So we kept that in mind as we're developing the checklist. And then the purpose for using the inspection form, checklist, or app, so this is one where you could check multiple boxes here. So a lot of people checked permit tracking and compliance, obviously, that's good. And then also inspection consistency, identifying common stormwater site issues, and then some of the other responses included streamlining the inspection process, establishing clear communication with the client, and facilitating more of a proactive approach to managing stormwater issues and future facility maintenance. So that was our initial survey, and we used that to kind of drive the information in the checklist as well as the meetings with the Storm TAC, the regional group in Thurston County. As Amy mentioned, we started off with the goal of 3 checklists, and that morphed into 5 checklists. So 3 of these are focused on erosion sediment control inspections for both that initial, during construction, and post-construction phase. And then the permanent stormwater BMP facilities focused on the during construction and the post-construction phase. And the discussion we had with that regional group is that's often 2 different inspectors that would go out. You have one inspector that's focusing on your erosion sediment control, and that could be a different inspector or engineer that would be focusing on those permanent facilities. So making sure we covered both those roles. At a small jurisdiction, that may be the same person, but it could be helpful to track those things on 2 separate forms. So an overview of what's contained in all 5 of the checklists. They all have a short objective statement at the top, a section on project information, inspection items that are generally grouped by construction SWIP element, so the elements 1 through 13, and examples of VMPs. This was something that came up on the City of Olympia's form that the group really liked, having those examples, especially for a new inspector or someone that's kind of learning the ropes of inspections. It's good to have that reminder of what are we looking at for this element. If I just say element number 4, what does that mean? Having some examples there so you know what to look at. Notes, comments field, and also a summary of corrective actions. So here's just the first page of the initial erosion sediment control inspection, and I guess we could probably just pass these out at the end. I think we've got, or do you want to pass them out now? Yep, you can pass them around now. So we've got packets that Amy will pass around. I think I have about 16 copies, so feel free to share if you don't get one. But we'll walk through kind of what's contained in each checklist, and these are also available online in both the Word format and an editable PDF format, so you can take those and modify those and use those in your programs. So the first one on there is the initial erosion sediment control inspection. It's just a front and back, 1 page. Try to keep this fairly simple, fairly streamlined. The objective here, as Amy mentioned, the initial erosion sediment control inspection should be conducted after the pre-construction meeting and installation of temporary best management practices, but prior to any clearing, grubbing, or grading at the site. This inspection is required for sites that have a high potential for sediment transport. So kind of linking back to the permit requirements. This whole top part of the page here is your project information, your property owner information, your inspector information, contractor, and your CECL information. So making sure you have all that documented. And then our initial erosion sediment control inspection items are at the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page. And then there's quite a bit of room for your notes and comments there. And as I mentioned, it's generally grouped by the construction SWIP element, inspection item, your BMP examples, and then a place to check everything looks good, it's satisfactory, action is required, or not applicable. And if you do check action required, at the back of each checklist, there's a summary of corrective actions table where you can fill out what actions needed and when that's completed. So that's the first checklist. The second one in the packet, kind of your, probably the bulk of your work is this during construction erosion sediment control inspection. So this is a 4-page checklist here. So again, our objective here at the top is inspections conducted during construction activities should verify proper installation and maintenance of required erosion sediment control BMPs and the protection of permanent stormwater BMPs facilities. So even though we created that separate set of checklists for permanent BMPs and facilities, we wanted to still make sure that the erosion sediment control inspector was checking for those things because they may be out there more frequently. They can notify the other inspector that there's an issue that may need to be looked at. So we wanted to make sure we had that tie-in. So again, similar project information you fill out at the top. Here below the line, there is a difference here. Is inspection occurring after a holiday, on a Friday afternoon, before, after, or during a storm? So those are things that kind of key in certain things that you might need to look for. We had originally folded that in later in the form, and there was a spot in the ecology form for like, is it raining today? How much rain? Things like that. And well, we thought, you don't really need to know that. You can look that up later if needed. What you really need to know is it a Friday afternoon? Should I be looking for something different than I would be looking for on a Monday morning? So making sure things are buttoned up before the weekend, things are getting covered. On a Monday morning, it would be totally different because people are starting to do their work. You would see uncovered stockpiles and things like that. There is a tie-in to the permanent BMP checklist at the bottom of the page, so just a reminder that there is that separate set of checklists that right now is kind of focused pretty heavily on those LID BMPs. So obviously there's other BMPs that could be included there, but for this project, the guidance that the regional group really wanted was focused on bioretention and permeable pavement. The middle 2 pages are really where the bulk of the inspection information is. So similar to the first checklist, we've got our construction SWIP element here, what we're looking for in terms of inspection item, some examples of BMPs that fall within that category, and then whether things look good or action is required. And on the back, there's your spot for notes and comments and summarizing your corrective actions. And the one difference on this checklist that you won't see on the other checklist is at the bottom of the 4th page. Was water quality monitoring part of this inspection? This was something we debated over with our regional group, and some required collecting turbidity and pH samples and others did not. So we wanted to make sure we at least had a template included in here. If that's not something you require your inspectors to do, you can just pull that right out. But if that's something you want to have a space to record those observations, we wanted to make sure that we included that in there. All right, the post-construction erosion sediment control inspection is the 3rd one in your packet. Again, we've got 1 page front and back, so trying to keep this simple. The one thing to point out here, so again, we've got our project information at the top. A couple things to point out here are tying into, has the required documentation been submitted to the city or county prior to formal project turnover? So this is one thing that we've noted with a lot of jurisdictions we work with, that there's not always the handoff of the information. So if someone's signing off on the final inspection, oh, we don't have our O&M plan or something like that in place. So you want to make sure, just as a reminder, check and make sure all the required documentation's been submitted before you final the inspection. Some of the jurisdictions we worked with required a stormwater drainage system cleaning at the end, so we added that as kind of a reminder. And then if you've got any upcoming permit or bioretention or permeable pavement infiltration testing, or if you've got a 2-year maintenance bond that you want to then go out and check later, there's kind of a reminder spot in there for that. The important thing here on the post-construction erosion sediment control inspection checklist is this first inspection item, 5A, is the site fully stabilized? And this was something that Amy mentioned and something that came up in our discussion. If it's not fully stabilized, you don't want to go ahead and spend all the time to fill out the rest of this form. That's something where you just say, it's not fully stabilized, I'm going to stop my inspection, provide feedback on what's needed, and come back later to fill the rest of this out. It's not worth filling this whole thing out if the site's not stabilized yet. One thing that came up during the trainings that we thought was interesting is the definition for fully stabilized is not included in either the permits, phase 1 or phase 2, or the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. If you do go and look at the construction stormwater general permit, there's a definition in there for fully stabilized that you can take a look at. It's in the next version. All right. It's been addressed. Thanks. Thanks for that input. So it sounds like in the 2019, there'll be a definition in the manual or the permit? In the permit. Okay, great. All right. Someone listened to what I was saying in one of my trainings, maybe, yeah. Or you knew that was an issue, so that's good. Great. So there will be a definition forthcoming. All right, so the last two checklists are our construction permanent BMP facility inspection checklist. So this is one of the longer ones. This is 6 pages. Here we're covering, again, the objective is inspections conducted during construction activities should verify proper installation and maintenance of permanent BMPs. Project information at the top, again, if it's occurring on a Friday afternoon before a predicted storm, things like that. So page 2 of this checklist focuses on general protection of permanent stormwater BMPs and facilities. So this is related to element 13 in the construction SWIP elements. And it talks about basically protecting your LID BMPs from siltation and compaction, taking proper precautions, covering surfaces, things like that. Page 3 is all about bioretention and rain gardens, so that's as streamlined as I could get that one. 6 items to look at for your bioretention and rain garden installations. And then, as try as I could, I couldn't get permeable pavement to fit on one page. I really tried, but came up with kind of 13 items for permeable pavement because it is a little more complex in terms of the installation. We want to make sure you're hitting all those milestones. So pages 4 and 5 are all about permeable pavement. And then on the back, we've got plenty of space for notes and comments and corrective actions there. So that's number 4. And the last one is our post-construction for permanent BMPs and facilities. And this one is a 3-pager. Again, here we're looking at proper installation and maintenance and performance of your permanent BMPs. Again, we've got this tie-in to, has the required documentation been submitted? Are there any upcoming inspections I should note? On the bottom of page 1 is looking at, your protection from siltation and compaction, proper soil amendments, vegetation and mulch. Page 2, there's a lot of information on page 2, so make sure you look at that. That's looking at bioretention, making sure everything's been installed properly. If you're doing an infiltration test, there's room to document that there. Permeable pavement's kind of divided into 2 categories here. There's slightly different requirements, whether you have a permeable pavement driveway or a road or a parking lot, what you can do for infiltration testing. So that's divided into 2. If you have just a driveway, you can do a 5-gallon bucket test. If you've got a road or parking lot, then you're triggering the ASTM C1701 or 1781. 1701 is for concrete and asphalt, and 1781 is for pavers. So that's where you have the 12-inch ring you put on the pavement with your plumber's putty around the edge. You've got calibrated buckets that you're pouring in and trying to get a constant head to look at what your infiltration rate is. One thing I wanted to note is we also had some debate over infiltration testing. Not every jurisdiction requires that. Wanted to make sure we had some basic guidelines there if you do require that or want to require that in the future. But that's something that's definitely flexible based on your inspector needs and requirements there. At the bottom of the page, you'll notice there's one line for all other permanent BMPs and facilities. So this is one we discussed with the group that, if we had more time and more budget, we would definitely flesh this out a bit more. There may be some facilities that you commonly see, whether it's ponds or vaults, so you may want to adjust that one to meet some of the common facilities that you see. But generally, everything else is kind of covered in that bottom line there. And then page 3 is all your notes and comments and corrective actions. All right. Oh, and I also wanted to point out, We think we'll have a little bit of budget left at the end of the project to develop at least one, if not more, of these in electronic format. We had some feedback from the trainings. We brought kind of a little demo of an electronic form in Survey 123, and there was some interest in that. So that's something that could definitely streamline your process as well. So that's something that we're going to look at too for wrapping up the project. So a little overview about the training. We had 6 trainings total. And as Amy mentioned, all the way from Edmonds down to Vancouver. So those were from November last year to March of this year. We just wrapped up the last one in Vancouver. We had 193 people that attended those. The first 3 were actually sold out, or at capacity. We didn't charge, so it was at capacity. And we had 56 different jurisdictions attend those. So I think that was pretty good in terms of distributing the information. And a lot of fun, so. All right, so checklists. I passed out the hard copies today. Hopefully most of you got one of those. If there's anyone here from Eastern Washington, there is a Eastern Washington specific fact sheet up here that you can come and grab. All the checklists, both Word and editable PDF version, are available on the Stormwater Center website. Here's the link right here, along with the fact sheets and the training materials. I also wanted to point out that if you attended my earlier talk on ditch maintenance, on that flash drive, all the files are also on there. So if you grabbed one of those, I was hoping we'd have some extras, but they went like hotcakes at the last presentation. So I did bring 4 sets of the training materials. At our trainings, people really enjoyed that activity and had a good time implementing that. So if you have a group of inspectors and you want to walk through that activity, I have the laminated copies of what we used at that training. So I've got 4 of those up here. I've got a few more back at the office if you're interested in that. But all those you can also download and print or print off the flash drive if you have one of those. So with that, we'll take any questions.